Hi there everyone, and welcome to this session on the September 2025 pre-scene information for the ACCA SBL exam. This session is brought to you in conjunction with PQ Magazine. I'm sure you are big fans of PQ Magazine, but just in case you're not, you can access it through the following link. I would recommend you to subscribe, as it's got lots of helpful information for ACCA students. So what I'm going to talk about is the pre-scene, but before I talk about the pre-scene, I just want to remind you of what the purpose of the pre-scene is. And in terms of what the purpose of the pre-scene is, this is not my opinion, but from the examining team, and I've presented on this with the examining team, and the pre-scene is there to help you become familiar with the business activities and the industry in which that business operates. Yep, we might not be familiar with that particular industry, and it just gives us a bit of a heads up so we can maybe have a little bit of a think and digest more about it. That is really important because your answers on SBL have to be given in the context of the company and the organization and the industry, which you can pick on from the pre-scene information. Yep. Obviously, you will get more information on the day of the exam, but it's really important to be able to contextualize that having read the pre-scene. And the pre-scene is there to give you a background, to give you context. It's not meant to give you loads of tips of what is going to come up in the exam. You will find people on Facebook telling you what's going to happen. Unfortunately, none of those people actually feature on the ACCA website as an expert. So just, I wouldn't take their advice. Yep. A lot of people talk like this on the basis of how people teach CIMA and ACCA EW exams, where the pre-scene information released by those professional examining bodies does give lots of clues as to what will be examined. But the ACCA have gone to great lengths to not really give anything away. So it's all about what's going on. And in this case, it's a meal kit business. You need to know something about a meal kit. So let's review. So you should have looked at this already. Let me have a look at what we have. We have a contents of what's going on. It's about a meal kit industry. If you don't know what the meal kit is, it's fully explained. It then talks about the dynamics of the industry, what the situation of other competitors are, and goes into a little bit of detail on a specific company which is called Menucraft. So let's have a look. What do we see on each of these pages? So as I say, it starts off explaining about Menucraft. That's a business based in the country of Ireland, and it's been going about 15 years, and the population of that country is about 40 million people. So not insignificant. If you don't know what the meal kit industry is, this explains it. Yep. So what basically happens is a company will put a variety of ingredients together in a box, keeping it fresh. They will deliver it to your house with a recipe card and instructions how to cook it. So if you only need, say, a teaspoon of herbs, they will provide you with a teaspoon of herbs. Whereas in real life, you probably can't buy a teaspoon of herbs at the supermarket, either leading to waste or leading to you spending more money than you need to. So yeah, that's what the meal kit industry is. If you want to maybe see how it works, if it's really not for you, I imagine in countries maybe like Singapore, where people spend most of their time eating out rather than eating in, it might not be so popular. Have a look at, there's a company called HelloFresh, which is very big in the industry. There's another company called Gusto. Maybe just have a look at some of their adverts where you can maybe get a visual on the typical product offering that a meal kit provider provides. It then talks about what the market is looking like. So, the market's growing. It's estimated to triple over the next decade globally. So that's encouraging. It talks about the first business, Freshie, which coincidentally is a market leader in Ireland. But Menucraft, which was introduced, was actually the first provider. But if we look at Menucraft, they were the first people in Ireland, so you could argue that they have first mover advantage. They're the most established. Customers probably will understand what they do and value their brand. But it also below there gives information on 4 main competitors, which are MC Food, Dropper and iMeals, as well as Freshie, who's the biggest. So just to give you an understanding of the dynamics of what's going on. What else do we see? Well, we then have information about Freshie. Who are they? Well, they've got 35% of the market in Ireland. They're a global player in many other countries. MC has 24% of the market and is the second biggest player. Why is that relevant? Well, it's going to suggest that people with larger volumes are likely to have better procurement power because they'd have economies of scale. They'll be able to bulk buy more if you've got 35% of the market compared with maybe a company like iMeals that has 13% of the market. So, just appreciate the dynamics of the business, and Freshie are, reasonable size. If we look at what's going on in the meal kit market in Ireland, there's demand for lots of variety. So lots of product development has been going on. So normally as markets mature, new products come out. So, the equivalent would be things like Diet Coke, Cherry Coke, Vanilla Coke. So here we don't just have one type of meals. We have, vegan meals, we have gluten-free and all of these things. The only issue there might be if we spread ourselves too thin, we might lose economies of scale advantages. Over on page 4, we have a nice little graphic of how you actually get your meal kit, how you subscribe. Those of us who actually indulge in meal kits will be familiar with this, but typically you set up an account, you decide on your portion and your preference, are you a vegetarian, etc., and then you decide how often you want your meal kits to be delivered. And so again, if you're not familiar, this explains it. And then it gives some key drivers of growth. I think we need to keep an eye on these, because when we look at key drivers of growth, if we are not observing them, then we might not grow. So basically, if we don't maintain quality, if we don't maintain convenience and don't keep innovating and providing variety in what we offer and keep our prices keen, we may lose out to competition. So there might be a situation, often there is, tables are turned in the real exam, and maybe the company decides to take another company over. Will that dilute its quality? Will it do something about menu variety and costs? Things to consider. We then talk about the industry challenges. So lots here on what is a challenge. It talks about, in terms of intense competition, it's coming not just from other meal kits, but people who might buy meal kits might also want heat and eat meals. So like a ready meal, I suppose, where people just get them out of the freezer and microwave them. In real life, I think companies like HelloFresh have also moved in to the heat and eat business, and you might consider, the evaluation of that. Is it suitable, feasible, acceptable? It does complement things. It might have drawbacks in other areas, but just be prepared to look at that. In terms of customer retention, well, I think it mentions later on that MC actually is really good at retaining customers, or is one of the best at retaining customers, but the industry by definition has quite a high churn rate. So you might think about, how do customers remain loyal? What do companies do? So, you might think about what Tesco does, or that's a big supermarket in the UK, where it gives you points. Does that make you go to Tesco rather than go to other supermarkets? Air miles, does that make you fly with a particular airline as opposed to others? Could that work in the meal industry? I think it could. Logistic complexities, well, in terms of the logistic complexities here, we do have quite complex logistical issues. We've got lots of suppliers. Really needs to be kept under tight control, or else costs could really spiral. So we need to really keep an eye on that. And then in a fresh food industry, obviously health and safety, hygiene is very important. I don't think you would get a second chance if you caused a salmonella scare. So this is absolutely crucial. And just maybe think about where there is potential chances of hygiene being compromised. It then talks a little bit about innovation, and it talks about how they use robots to pack the food. I would be thinking about using robots in the whole process, particularly that complex logistical stuff, maybe on the inbound logistics, what's going on there. It also brings up data analytics. So again, that should set some alarm bells off. Make sure you read some ACCA articles on data analytics. Think about the challenges. You might know about the 3 V's, volume, velocity, etc. Know about that. Know about the problem with storage of data and compliance with data management rules and how it can get you into trouble, how you can get fined. Yeah, that's something that definitely you should be all over. In terms of other things said, well, it talks about there's competition. It talks about delivery partnerships. And again, in real life, I think in some markets, expert at delivery would be someone like Amazon. And Amazon, I think, has partnered with some of these meal kit people. So literally, the people just do the meals. Logistics, they would define as a non-core business, and they would outsource it. So maybe have a little think about, outsourcing and the benefits and drawbacks of it, because that's what they've done. They've outsourced delivery, it mentions later. So think about that. And then it gives some KPIs. Make sure you're familiar with them, because what will happen often in a scenario is they're going to take someone over, they're going to merge with someone, and will those KPIs be compromised in any way? And you would probably evaluate, is it suitable, feasible, acceptable, and think about whether order value, meals delivered, carbon emissions might be affected in any way. And it also mentions about an industry body. Now, these were the people that would give license to you ability to make food. And obviously, if you are shown to be negligent, causing food poisoning and stuff like that, you could have your license taken away. That's basically going to compromise your whole business. So, yeah, be familiar with that. We then look at the Menucraft business in more detail. In terms of how Menucraft positions itself in the market, it positions itself as a business of high quality, which sources local high quality produce. So again, there could be an option that might lead to the non-sourcing of local stuff, a compromise of quality. You need to have it clear that Menucraft is a high quality. You wouldn't have, Emirates deciding to become EasyJet. It doesn't fit their business model. So just appreciate that. It obviously employs talented people. I imagine they're quite expensive. It uses the internet, it uses IT a lot. It mentions, again, with IT, we need to make sure that our systems are secure. They are not going to be hacked. There was recent news, probably too late for the exam, where a very famous retailer, Marks and Spencer's, was hacked, and its ability to deliver stuff was basically prevented for over a month. Yeah, more than a month actually, and it cost it tens of millions of pounds, all because a couple of teenagers had basically asked for kind of ransomware, or they'd done a ransomware attack and free the system for $50 million or whatever. So that's something we need to really be careful about. I think, IT, because it is reliant on it in production, in distribution, in marketing, you really need to read articles that the ACCA have published on systems and on the potential threat and the risks to them and how we mitigate them. It then goes and talks about the structure The first thing to be aware of is that it's listed on the stock exchange, which means it has to observe corporate governance, and also it will have access to more capital than non-listed companies. It gives a very brief, not too detailed overview of the board. You might get more of that in the exam or more detail on it. But yeah, just again, appreciate about corporate governance, why it happens, appreciate why NEDs are there, appreciate about a balanced board and why that is important. We then see operations of MC that they have lots of suppliers, 600, could cause logistical issues potentially. It says they do assess the local people, but I would like a bit more information with regards to what kind of certification do these people have? Are they internationally recognized certificates? Is there a chance that people could fake them? I'd be interested in that. What else? Well, it talks about organic farming methods. They don't use pesticides. Is this a key driver of why customers buy products from us? Again, we might be doing business or merge with someone that doesn't do this, that might compromise us. I think there's been a controversy with the UK buying, is it bleached chicken or something like that? I think in America they bleach their chickens, and I don't think we do that in the UK. So America is wanting to sell more products. So we just need to be aware of those things. Also, they seem pretty good with the waste that they have. You know, they either make it into animal feed or donate it to local charities. So they seem pretty environmentally aware, which is a good positive thing. So yeah, it seems a nice business. It then goes on about how things are delivered and, you know, they're kept in temperature controlled areas. I would just be a bit concerned because it's kind of temperature critical and things could go bad and things could cause food poisoning. You know, do they have any disaster recovery? Do they have any contingency planning in place? And again, they've only got one packaging supplier. This is a good thing in that we can work very, very closely with them, but it also could be a bad thing if we don't have alternative sources of supply, because that supplier could become powerful, could put prices up, and we wouldn't really have any choice. So yeah, there's a bit on that, how it all works. What else does it say? The packaging people, because they work close with them, have environmentally friendly boxes. So yeah, that's all good. It also then goes about the box production, which again is quite robotic, reliant on IT. So again, we need to protect this IT from hacking and bugs. And then it talks about their distribution. Again, they don't distribute themselves. They use a local logistics company who seem to have green vehicles and who seem to be pretty good at what they do. You might have to consider, what if we brought that in-house? Again, that's thinking about outsourcing. But, you know, are we a transport business or are we a food business? What might the pros and cons of that be? We then have a risk report. So on all of these risks, you need to be clear. How does competition affect us? What would happen? So obviously they can price cut. They can increase the cost of participation in the market by pushing advertising up. They could take market share away. We lose our economies of scale. Legal stuff. Well, there was a regulator. If we were to fall foul of regulations, we might lose our license. We might get sued for food poisoning. Customer attraction and retention. So how do we get new customers in? What might we do to help keep customers and get more customers? And then we've already mentioned about data and information, how there are all sorts of regulations on it. There's all sorts of risks on it, and you should be fully familiar with how you mitigate them. But for those risks, we should also think about how we might measure them, and we should understand what the impact of those risks getting bigger could be. We've then got a website. The reason that we should just digest what's on the website is, again, in this scenario, what might happen is we're looking at buying a company and that company's values don't align with our values. Is that a problem? It could be like the example I gave of EasyJet, buying or being bought by Emirates. It probably wouldn't work. It's a different business model. So yeah, that's your pre-scene material. I wouldn't sweat it too much, but I think it's important for you to understand what it does. If you're living in a country where this isn't so prevalent, it is pretty widespread throughout the world now. But yeah, I've certainly traveled to countries where I've not been aware of it. So what else do we have? We have information on performance. Again, this is kind of rough stuff. It gives us a kind of feel for things. So you can see the revenue is growing, but that revenue has slowed down. It's still growing, but it's slowed down. A bit of a more saturated markets. Again, it's growing, but again, it's slowed down from 47% to 15%. So probably a more saturated market. Active customers have grown, but the growth has slowed down. The order value has gone up, but I'd be thinking, well, have costs gone up as well? So is that relevant? Have costs gone up more? I think we would need more information to assess the relevance of that information. So that, in a fairly quick nutshell, is your pre-scene information. Please don't spend hours going through the accounts of HelloFresh. I do think it's worth just becoming familiar with what HelloFresh does. Maybe look at an advert, see how they do things, but please don't look at their accounts and stuff like that. The case study will give you fresh information in the exam. The pre-scene information is what's key. The industry mentioned in the pre-scene is what's key. So yeah, stick with that. Your job would be just to make sure that the syllabus areas are all clear to you, and don't forget that in the exam it's about application and not regurgitation. Yeah, so no marks for regurgitating theory, but yeah, use those theories to help catalyze and develop your answers. So I hope that helps, and yeah, good luck with your exam.